Today we have a huge Q&A, so to check out specific questions, be sure to look at the index listed below. Ho ho ho.
What's up, my Yugioh bros? I'm yours, the one, the only, the RJB0. Welcome to Casual Friday. Merry Qlistmas, and I'd make a Hanukkah pun, but that would just be way too ironic considering that we're talking about Qliphorts. Today we have a ton of questions from people having to do with Qliphorts and Mermails, and so I am going to get right down to them. Let's start off with Destroyer831642, who asks about the possibility of combining Qliphorts and Monarchs. He calls them Qliphnarchs. I say that that is an abomination to the naming world, but basically the idea behind Qliphnarchs is that they're, oh god, I just need to not call it that. Behind Qliphort Monarchs or Monforts? I don't know, there's just no good way to make that name happen. Basically the idea behind them is they have synergy because Qliphorts get their effects when they're tributed, and they do a lot with tribute summoning, and they're all 2410 and 2810, which supposedly gives them some synergy with the Monarch support cards. The problem with this theory is that a lot of the Monarch support cards prevent you from going into the extra deck, and the only ones that have decently good effects that don't kind of permanently block you out of your extra deck are the Monarch Stormforth, Grudge of the Monarchs, which you're just going to use to search Monarch Stormforth, and Escalation of the Monarchs, which another person asked about later in the video, so I might as well address that now. So the problem with Escalation of the Monarchs is, while it seems like a decent card up front, it allows you to do your Qliphort tribute summonings during your opponent's turn. The problem with it is that you don't want to get your Qliphort tribute summon monsters effects during your opponent's turn, because, I mean, with the exception of Alias next format, but we're going to get that into that in a second, because if you use your Scout, it's just going to destroy themselves. The Qliphort monsters are just going to destroy themselves, and you're just going to have a couple of extra monsters to deal with for your opponent to run into during the rest of the turn, because if you have a Scout, chances are your opponent is going to have trouble getting over the darn Scout, so they're probably not going to be able to deal any damage. So activating Scout during your opponent's turn allows your opponent to deal damage during a turn which they wouldn't have if you hadn't summoned the Scout. Anyway, so the point being, Escalation of the Monarchs isn't really that great in the current format, and it's not even great once Alias comes out, because that will be post Secrets of Eternity, and in Secrets of Eternity we get a much better trap card than Escalation of the Monarchs, and that card is Soul Turnover. It allows you to tribute a Qliphort monster that was normal summoned while you don't have any special summon monsters on the board to draw 2 cards, and that allows you to get your Qliphort tributes off, and it also allows you to draw 2 cards, which I think is way better than allowing you to tribute summon during your opponent's turn. So I would say that just based on the support cards, Qliphort Monarchs is not going to work. The other problem with Qliphort Monarchs is that the Monarchs have the universal problem of simplifying the game state. And while that's not necessarily bad in a lot of situations, it's bad for Qliphorts because Qliphorts don't want to simplify the game state. They don't need to simplify the game state. The way that Qliphorts win is by complexifying the hell out of the game state, by seeing as many Qliphorts as possible. So even teching Monarchs oftentimes turns out to be a bad idea for Qliphorts, just because they simplify the game state. They're a dead card unless you have tribute summon material, and they just do not help the deck to do what it does best, which is to spam the board with monsters and put down an epic beatdown. Alex Bell asks why Nekloth's players are running Book of Eclipse in the OCG instead of Swords of Concealing Light. I think that it's because MST is a thing, and Nekloths really don't have anything to MST, so if you're running the Swords of Concealing Light, then that gives your opponent something to MST, as opposed to if you're running the Book of Eclipse, in which case they're going to be holding their MSTs for nothing. The Swords of Concealing Light is almost definitely going to get MST because your opponent isn't going to have any other use for MST against Nekloths. Nicholas Blutreich asks, when a card like Star Drawing is used as Xyz material for a rank-up play, do you still get the conditions for Star Drawing to make you draw a card? I believe they do. This is not actually an official ruling. We haven't yet gotten an official ruling on this to my knowledge, but I think it's being used as Xyz material, so I think that the Xyz summon should get its effect to draw a card, because that's what that is the wording on Star Drawing. It says, when this card is used as an Xyz material, the Xyz monster gains the following effect. When this card is special summoned, draw a card. So I think it's a pretty open and shut case. Yugioh asks, what impact do you think Noden would have to the meta if he comes to the TCG? I think that he would substantially increase the number of combo-based decks that we see. I think that we would see a lot from Tellarknights if he came to the TCG. And I think we might see some new variants of Shadows, primarily because he can bring back tuners and he can bring back Dragon and stuff like that. So you might see a couple of Shadow players running like 2 instant fusions and a Noden, but really the big effect it would have, given the current format that we're in exactly right now, would be to increase the play of Tellarknights. But given the next format, in which we are going to be seeing many more Mermail players anyway, I think that Noden would significantly support Mermails. Yule Franz is asking me about Spirit Beast / Ritual Beast and what support would make them broken. I think, as he suggests, something that has an effect every time you summon a Spirit Beast would be pretty amazing, like if you draw a card or if you do something crazy like that. But really right now they just need better fusion monsters. Their fusion monsters have really cool utility stuff, but they never actually do anything to your opponent. One of them has 2600 and that's just about it. You basically have to rely on the trap card for removal. So if they had an Xyz monster that had some kind of ignition removal without destroying, or that had more attack points, or did something besides, toolboxing the graveyard and the deck and the special and the banish zone, then I think that that would make Spirit Beasts what they need to be. But for right now, they have a really cool mechanic, a really amazing mechanic that doesn't do a huge amount in the end because it doesn't have any effect on the opponent. Yugioh asks, who's your favorite? Scrawny Arms Rob Lowe, Painfully Awkward Rob Lowe, Super Creepy Rob Lowe, or Super Hairy Rob Lowe? Oh, dude, I will take any Rob Lowe any day, but I think I would have to go with Painfully Awkward Rob Lowe because I would break him out of his shell. He also asked if I've read any good blogs recently. I've been reading a lot of online newspapers because that's kind of what I do. I don't read a lot of blogs. One thing I found that was super cool was a blog called Clean Technica, which talks about new sustainable technologies that are super cool, that are like massive money savers, and are just like the science behind them are really interesting. Alex Green asks, hey, I'm interested in Infernoids, but I don't know how they work. Could you explain how to use them, please? On to the next pack. Let's see what I get. Oh, cool, I pulled an Infernoid. In all seriousness, though, if you're going to use Infernoids, the way you need to make them work is to mill as many monsters as possible and then hope to be able to reoccur your boss monster as much as possible. If you can do that, you might win a game. I think that they're just like a super sacky version of Dark Worlds, and so I don't think that they're going to do a huge amount to the meta, but if you want to play them, what you want to do is run Reasoning and run Curry Bandit and anything that's going to put as many monsters in the graveyard as possible so that you can revive the big guy. Zolonge. That's what your name is now, Zolonge. Asks, what do you think of Mega Caius? I think Mega Caius is an absolutely amazing card. I don't see a huge number of applications for it in the meta, except maybe like Burning Abyss, because then you could do a ton of super cool things against like Darklaw and against Shadows and stuff like that, but I don't see it making a huge impact on the meta. It's just a really good card that hasn't found its deck yet. James Taubman asks, do you think that rank 4 decks are good right now, and what do they need to beat out Tellarknights? Any card suggestions? Well, the thing about trying to beat Tellarknights in terms of rank 4 is that the only reason why Tellarknights aren't like one of the best decks of the format is because rank 4s aren't amazing in this format. There aren't a lot of rank 4s that do a huge amount. Castell is really darn good, and that's pretty much the one that you're going to be going to as much as possible if you can't make Triver. But the thing about Tellarknights is they have everything they need to be a rank 4 deck. They have a monster that brings back monsters from the graveyard. They have a monster that brings monsters out from your hand. They have a monster that searches for more level 4s, and all of them do this whenever they're summoned in any way. So you can recur them, you can summon them from the deck, you can summon them from the hand, and every time you summon a Tellarknight, it is going to get its effect. So they have everything a rank 4 deck needs in order to be really good. All they need are just better rank 4s for the format. I think given a different format, Tellarknights would be an absolutely devastating deck because there are a lot of really good rank 4s out there that just aren't very good against the current meta. So in order for a rank 4 base deck that isn't Tellarknights to beat Tellarknights, they would have to do everything Tellarknights do with better rank 4s that Tellarknights cannot make. So that is the only way that a rank 4 deck is going to beat Tellarknights right now in the current meta. I think the only way that you could improve Tellarknights is give them a way to search Stellar Nova Alpha. Babble Rab asks, do you think that winning Worlds affects the way Konami hits a deck on the ban list, as well as how quickly they decide to bring cards back that were initially hit on the ban list? I think all evidence points toward that. There are very few reasons why they would make the decisions that they've made regarding decks that won Worlds if they weren't focusing on what deck won Worlds. Konami never showed any patterns of smart touches to Infernoids before that list, even though Infernoids had been doing many things before that list and that Konami had many opportunities to hit them. But then after Worlds comes and after Infernoids win Worlds, then they finally decide to hit Archfiend. I think that that's awfully suspicious, besides the fact that Blackwings won Worlds at one point and then everything got limited and it's taken them this long to unlimit the one card that for some reason they consider to be the center of the deck, even though Gale is not even that great a card and hasn't been for years. So I would say that, yeah, it probably does influence their choices when it comes to hitting decks in the meta. San Diego Snuggler asks, do you think it is fair for Konami to allow decks to fall out of popularity or competitiveness, or should Konami make new archetypes or support keeping the goal of keeping older decks competitive in mind? Yu-Gi-Oh! Players are so weird. You complain all the time about how there isn't enough variety in the meta, and all we say are the same old decks over and over and over again, and then you complain about how all your nostalgic decks aren't still competitive. Like, really, it doesn't make sense. Konami gives us amazing and fun new stuff all the time, and you complain about how that's just the same old, and it gets boring after like a month and a half of play. You've hardly gotten time to play with these decks, and people are already like, oh, it's super boring. It's always the same old top 3 decks. Nothing ever changes, even though the meta changes literally once every month and a half. And then you come back and you're like, why aren't windups still good? Why aren't all these decks that we've seen for years still contenders in the meta? Well, the thing is, Konami's trying to keep things fresh, and I think it's a-okay that Konami keeps things fresh by not always bringing back old decks constantly, because I want to see new stuff. And Qliphnarchs, Shadows, Tellarknights, and Burning Abyss are new stuff. I've had my time playing against all these decks that people are nostalgic for. So yeah, I like it that Konami keeps things fresh and every once in a while brings back a really old deck. And that's nice to see. Every once in a while, that's a cool thing, because there are decks that we've seen in the past that I really like and I would like to see more of in the future. But I don't want them to always be bringing back older decks to keep the same old decks always competitive. I think that's bad for the game, and I would not enjoy a format that does that. Mickey Noon asks if I can ask Nick to profile his heroes. We will see. Matt S. asks, in my opinion, what Mermails have the best artwork? Megalo, hands down. Megalo is one of the prettiest cards ever made. I mean, look at that. Look at all the color and the shine. It's just such a pretty card. Such a pretty card. So like brightly shaded and stuff like that. It's so nice. In terms of, you also asked me which one the best ulti is. It depends on whether you're asking comparatively to its ultra or just in general. Because in general, I would say Lind, but in comparison to its ultra, I would say Abyss Sphere. I'd say that Abyss Sphere is the only card out of the deck that looks better as an ulti than it does as an ultra. He also asked how I would feel about getting a Mermail deck box like the Noble Knights got, and I would definitely get it. OMG Wafflib asks, were you wearing pants during this video? I was wearing pants last week and I'm wearing pants right now. I'm always wearing pants in my video. The glare makes it hard to see. Wearing khaki shorts, that's what I'm doing. When I'm dressed in business casual, I go full business casual. Like, I'm wearing the slacks and everything. WheezyLeaf90383 asks, which of the themes with a structure deck, as in Cybers, Light Sworns with Dragon Rulers, or Fire Kings, would be best to take to a large tournament versus meta decks right now? What would that change depending on the format? Well, right now, I would probably say Light Sworn Rulers, but I mean, like, none of these are particularly great right now. Next format, though, I would say that the Atlantean structure deck with Mermails in it would be really good, considering that Gund is now going to 3. Sinjin Trom asks, can Spellbooks and Fire Kings put in work this format? No. I mean, Fire Kings sometimes have an alright matchup against Qliphnarchs just because they can keep removing field presence and dealing damage over and over again, but that's really all they can do. And Spellbooks just don't have enough advantage. They have one resource that's really good, and that's Fate, and then after that, like, Like, after that, they have Priestess, and Priestess destroys cards, and she only has 2,500 attack. It's just like the entire archetype has fallen out of favor. David Casimir asks if he made a good call when he traded his Harpy deck for a Mermail deck. I would say so. Quickman DWN.013 asks, RJ, I agree with your statement that rogue decks are bad this format. However, rogue decks like Madolches and Mermails are still topping regionals all over the place. I have seen no such thing, but I will accept your premise for the rest of this argument. Are these decks less bad, or is there a place for good rogue decks in the meta? I would say that they're less bad right now. Mermails are getting back their extra guns, which means that they're going to have way more OTK power, and they're going to go way harder on the aggro, and I think that that is definitely going to improve their game in the meta, and I would say that they would be a good rogue deck in the meta come next format. Other than that, I don't see any good rogue decks this format. The Garunix King asks, what is your guilty pleasure deck, which is a deck that isn't very good, but you still enjoy playing it? Oh man, Junk Doppel. 24/7 Junk Doppel. It's not a great deck, even with the new support. Without Noden in the TCG, it's not amazing. However, it is so much fun to play. I just cannot stop. Hades X736 asks, what are your thoughts on net decking? Do you feel it removes player creativity? Also, are you sad that Korra is finishing? I'm not really sad that Korra is finishing. I'm glad that Avatar has stuck around for so long. It was a pretty big part of my teenagerhood and my childhood. It's amazing that it's been around for that long. But my thoughts on net decking are that I don't think it removes player creativity because net decks don't win. You don't see decks that were net decked hitting the top tables at an event. Because the meta evolves, and as the meta evolves, decks that topped previously are no longer going to be viable in the next event because people are going to be expecting players to play like that. And so net decks don't actually win because players are already prepared to face against that build of the deck. So the decks that win are almost always, at the very least, tweaks on net decks, if not a total rebuilding on the deck. I apologize for any noise in the background. There's some kind of street work going on outside. In terms of on a personal level, I don't think anybody net decks and then just sticks with the deck. I think what people do is they net deck to test out the deck, to see how it works. They choose an already successful build for the deck just to test it out, just to figure out how to play the deck, and then they make their own version of the deck. I don't think anybody wants to hold on to a net decked version of a deck because it's boring and it doesn't fit your play style. I mean, if you believe that play styles make a difference, and it's an old version, people like to modify decks. So I think net decking is actually good for players because it allows you to test out a deck, a good version of a deck, to understand how the deck works before you attempt to make your own version. Homeboy asks, my question is, do you see Denko Sekka taking a price drop anytime soon? Probably not. It's probably like the lowest is probably going to get is about $20. William Fan asks, why is RJ moving again? I'm going to school in Bellingham, so that's why I'm moving in about 2 weeks. Yugi Skills asks about my opinion on Dragunities' future competitive viability. I think that Dragunities are going to have a competitive run if the Dragon Rulers all came back and if Ravine came back to 3. That's just about it, because the advantage of Dragunities when they were good was that they were a version of the Dragon Ruler deck that was faster than all the other versions and could create bigger boards more quickly. So in that way, that I think that Dragunity could have a competitive future. However, it will only be once the Dragon Rulers possibly just come back to 2, but definitely if Ravine goes back to 3. Madolche Man for Life asks, is it worth siding in Starlight Road against BA or not? I would actually say if you're going down that road, so to speak, you should go for Huge Revolution is Over, because Huge Revolution is Over is a counter trap card, so your opponent cannot respond to it with anything except another counter trap card, and also it banishes the Fire Lake so that they can't get it back with Dante. I would say that's probably not a smart road to go down one way or another, and you need to stop making that pun. Because if your opponent is going to let you get back row, then they probably don't have Fire Lake in the first place, so it's not something you need to worry about. If you're going first, yeah, maybe Huge Revolution is Over could be a possibly good idea. So I would say that if you're going to go with a Mass Destruction Preventer, I would definitely go with Huge Revolution is Over. San Diego Snuggler also asks, what would happen in the game to make me decide to stop playing, or is there anything? I think that in order for me to stop playing, I'd have to not be around people that I enjoy playing with. I would have to, stop enjoying playing the game. That would also mean that if it became basically a Tier 0 format, where the only deck in the format is what I consider to be a degenerate deck, which is a deck whose goal is to stop the game of Yugioh from being played, something like Final Countdown or Chainbird, then I'd probably stop playing the game until that deck went away. But other than that, it's really just if I don't have anybody to play with. Chthonian Alliance asks what my opinion is on the card Oni Raigeki. Oni Raigeki is a... It seems like a good card, but like its only real use is against something like Qliphnarchs, which is just going to go into battle phase and crash into it. And it's like, great, you prevented yourself from taking damage for a turn, and that's pretty much it. Against Nekloths, really, they're just going to go into battle phase and then go into main phase 2, and then they're going to trish your ass and you're still going to lose a ton of advantage. Nicholas Bluethrike asks, what do you think about stealing in Yu-Gi-Oh! And how it's actually a very common thing that goes on under the radar or gets ignored. I don't think it gets ignored, not in the community I'm in. People take stealing really seriously around my area. It's one of the few things that my meta is really good about, is paying a lot of attention to stealing. We had a guy banned from like all the stores in the area because he stole a guy's deck. And so I think that stealing is awful, especially if you're doing it to another player. Like, okay, so there's like a hierarchy of stealing. If you do it to a big company like Freddy's or something like that, it's bad, it's immoral, you shouldn't do it, but it isn't that bad in the scheme of things. If you're doing it to locals, that's a massive dick move to the rest of the community because your locals support you, they allow you to play, they probably take up a lot of space to let your tournaments go on, and if you steal from them, that's just a massive dick move since they are doing you such a big favor by allowing you to hold tournaments there. And finally, if you steal from another player, oh my god, you're just an awful person, because think about how hard it is to get cards. Like in my area, it is tough to get cards. If you steal a deck from a player, especially some of these players who work on building a deck for like a year. I know a guy who had a max rarity spellbook deck almost stolen. This was in the case where the guy got banned. He was working on building that deck. He had been working on that deck for a year and a half, and the guy just takes it. And the guy was actually his friend. That's just like, you're a terrible person. You're a dick. You're not cool. I hope you enjoy your cards because you just basically sold your soul because it has to take an utter lack of empathy to steal a person's deck or to steal a person's cards, because that's a hell of a lot of money out of a person's pocket. And that's literally like walking into a person's house and taking $500 out of their safe, possibly even more. So yeah, stealing is bad anytime, but there are definitely times that are worse than others. And finally, Robert Lopez asks, what do you think of the OCG support for Crystal Beast? It's obviously not going to make the meta, but what is your opinion on the cards and their effect on the deck? Really, it's just going to make the deck a little faster. It doesn't improve the kinds of plays that they can make, and that's why it's not going to make the meta, but it does significantly speed up the deck. So there you guys go. This was a particularly long Q&A. I think I had something like 40 questions today. So I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you didn't, let me know why in the comment section below. And of course, comment with any questions you want to ask me that I can answer during the next Casual Friday video. This week I have coming another episode of Decks That Make You Better at the Game of Yu-Gi-Oh! I have a rant about how Dark Law is bad for the game, and I have a couple of other discussion videos, as well as next week's Casual Friday. So thank you guys for watching. I'm your host, the one, the only, the RJB0, and I got a jet. See you guys.